everyone, welcome to Woodland Spinning. My name is Rachel. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. As you can probably hear in my voice, I'm still recovering from being sick. It has been a very long haul. I just got a really terrible head cold and couldn't get rid of it. So I'm sorry that the first live stream this month was canceled. I didn't have a voice at the time and I'm not sure how long my voice is going to last today, but I am feeling a lot better. I just don't sound great. So in today's episode, we have a ton to talk about. It is the best time of year, that is Tour de Fleece, and it is quickly followed up with Tour de Fleece Femme. And I have taken with me on our trip this summer a whole bunch of spindles and my ball winder, so that I can wind off all the singles while we're gone and keep on spinning. We are camping this week. We took a week to go to Jasper, Alberta here in Canada to spend some time, just the four of us, have some quiet, get away from the house, get away from all of the contractors and all the things going on, and actually get a little bit of a holiday this summer. So I hope that you will join me in enjoying this episode. I hope that you can carve out a bit of time for yourself today and have a watch. And maybe if you're joining us live, I'm hoping to be in the chat. If I'm not there, it's because I'm having Wi-Fi issues and connectivity issues. But otherwise, I hope that this finds you very well and that you're able to carve out some time to yourself. For those of you who don't know me and haven't met me yet, my name is Rachel. We come here to talk all about hand spinning and hand spun yarn, and sometimes the yarn is the project. Sometimes that is it. And other times we want to create fabric and we want to use the yarn as a stepping stone to something else. And that is what we talk about here. So without further ado, let's get into the show. So I had mentioned early, as soon as at the top of the show, that I had a lot to talk to you about today, and I was not lying. I have a lot to share with you. So I thought actually what we would do first is start off with some spindling projects, because my spindling has been first and foremost. Before I came down with this really terrible cold, I actually was working on my spindling a lot, and we were watching a lot of World Cup games, and I was spending most of the game actually standing and watching and spindling while we were watching, which was a really enjoyable way of doing it. And I got through a lot of yardage. This first spin was from Bramble Ridge, and I'm going to shift over slightly so that I can put in a photo here of what the original braid looked like. It was a very luxurious braid, and I normally don't purchase a lot of these braids because I've been really trying hard to keep the braids that are coming into my stash to a minimum and trying to work the majority of the time from stash. But this is in the Mushroom Hunt colorway, which many of us have spun in the community. It's one of Megan's like stalwart workhorse backbone kind of colorway. I can't imagine her ever not having this colorway. It's been dyed on all sorts of bases. We've seen it in all sorts of different applications. Many people in the community have spun it. And this was 100 grams of fine Haunuii from New Zealand, and that was 70% of the braid, and then 30% silk. And she calls this her Harlequin blend, which I love. And I had been sitting on this for quite a while because I bought it from her back in the early, like late winter, early spring. I think it was the late winter actually that I got it, because I was buying fiber for my students for Fibers West back in March. So it would have been like February. And I just put it in my stash at my mom's to save. My plan was to come to it when I wasn't really working on anything else, but I didn't spend a lot of time at my mom's place when we were living there spinning on my wheels. My spinning wheels sort of ended up taking a little bit of a back seat, and I ended up not working on them particularly much. And I think part of it was just the nature of the environment that we were living in at the time. There was a lot of coming and going. I was doing an unbelievable amount of driving, and my wheels progressively just sort of slowly got pushed further and further and further into the corner. And it wasn't that I wasn't making an effort to work on them or to do any spinning. I actually did quite a bit while I was at Mum's, but I think just sitting down and spinning for any length of time on my wheels just didn't end up being a part of the work that I did while we were there. I ended up working a lot more on my charka, which was great. I really, really enjoyed that, but it was a different type of work versus pulling out my wheels. The other thing that happened was back in the fall before we moved to my mom's, I had put on a new drive band on my Majacraft Suzie Pro. We're gonna do a little bit of a side quest here for just a moment, and we'll come back to this later in the show. But I had done a drive band change on my Suzie, on my Majacraft Suzie Pro, and I have a first generation Suzie. It's quite a heavy wheel, and I really like the smoothness of it. It's just a really smooth wheel. The ratios aren't as high as they are on my Majacraft Rose, because on my Rose, the drive wheel is just that little bit bigger. That the difference between the fastest whirl and the drive wheel is that much more that you can have that slightly higher ratio. That said, my Suzie Pro spins beautifully, and it still to this day is my most favorite wheel. And I was having a conversation on Instagram a couple of weeks ago with Maxwell in Calgary, Maxwell Spin, and he was asking me which one I prefer, and it was really hard to choose which one would be my like go-to wheel. But when I changed the drive band back in the fall, this is going somewhere, I promise. When I put it all back together, I also disconnected and took apart the Footman that connect the treadle to the shanks at the back of the wheel. And it was mostly because I wanted to just make sure that they were okay, that they didn't need to be replaced, that they weren't, sort of disintegrating or not as sort of lacking in integrity compared to what they were, because it's not a new wheel, and I've had it for quite a long time. And I've done very little maintenance on it other than, dusting it and keeping it clean. Long story short, when I put it back together, I don't know exactly what I did, but I did something, and the Footmen no longer fit quite as well as they had. And I think I actually inadvertently kind of twisted them a little bit when I put it all back together. And ever since then, the wheel has backspun. No matter what I do, starting, stopping, in the spin, after the spin, it doesn't matter, it's always back spinning. It was really difficult to get enough momentum to get it to go forward. Like literally it was difficult to keep it going in one direction. And so the whole time that we were at my mom's, my Suzie kept being pushed further and further off to the side, and I just kind of started defaulting to my Rose. And so if I was going to spin on a wheel, I would just grab my Rose. And then a couple of times I actually did grab out my Lundrum Saxony. That's a whole other conversation for another time. And I think because of not really knowing how to fix my Suzie Pro, and not really knowing exactly what was wrong, even though I tried a couple of times to take it apart and reattach it again, it just never really felt the same. And so what I ended up doing was, now that we're home and I felt like I had the space and the time, I took it all apart again, and I really intentionally and very carefully put it back together. I also tightened all the little screws up top in the maiden. That wasn't the issue, those were tight. And putting it all back together again, it is spinning the way that it used to spin again. So I think what I did was I accidentally twisted one of the Footmen, because when I was looking at it, when I took it apart once we were home, I could tell that the screw marks weren't correct compared to where the screws had been before. And so now that it's spinning beautifully, I've gone back to spinning on my Suzie and using it and pulling it out all the time. And it really made me realize that the tools that we rely on and the tools that we work with the most often are generally the ones that work the best for us, have the best ergonomics for us, and just fit us really super well. So what I've noticed is, since I fixed it, I've been defaulting back to spinning on my Suzie again. So with the World Cup and watching all of the games and whatnot, it's been really fun to pull out my spindles and to start working with them again, and enjoying the yin and yang of both, and pulling out the spindles that I love the most, which are generally my suspended spindles or my drop spindles, and having my Suzie running the way that it used to run and smooth like it used to spin. So my plan had been that once I got my Suzie running beautifully again, because I knew it was a user error. I knew it was something that I had done and I just needed to spend the time with this space to be able to take it apart and put it all back together again. My plan had been to take this braid and to spin it on my Suzie. But because I hadn't sat down to actually fix my Suzie quite yet, and we were just sort of settling back into the home and Tour de Fleece was on the horizon, I pulled out my suspended spindles, my drop spindles, my favorite spindles, and started spinning it. So I stripped it all down and made all of these little nests of fiber. This is the last one for the first half of the braid. And actually, when you're watching this, I probably will be working on the second half of this because we're away and I took this project with us. But because it is so slippery and so smooth, I've been spinning to my drop spindles, like I said, but because it's so smooth and it needs so much twist because of that really fine Haunuii and then all of that silk in there, that 30% silk, I can't fill my spindles as full as I normally would before switching to a new one because they're just too heavy. So as soon as they get sort of this much fiber on them, which is about a third of the half braid, so whatever 50 is divided by 3, so about 20-ish, just shy of, you know, just under 20 grams. They're just too full and they start to drop and the singles start to break. So these are the 3 that I've got going so far. This one will be full and then this half of the braid will be done. And these 2 spindles are my Bosworth spindles, these 2 here. I love these spindles so much, and I come back to these again and again. And then this one is an Ed Pretty that's also one of my favorites, and I come back to this one again and again. I have 4. Where is my 4th one? It's around here somewhere. I will see if I can find it. I basically have 4 of these, all between about 27 and 32 grams. They're all like within, 5 grams of one another. The heaviest being this one here, which I think is 32 grams, and the lightest being this one, which I think is 27. I also have a David Smith, a Hound design. He's not making spindles anymore. He sort of retired because of an allergy to the sawdust. But I have another one of his that's about the same weight as this, and I use it as well. The 5 of them are kind of my interchangeable drop spindles. But I've been really enjoying this spin and really enjoying coming back to this, coming back to these tools, knowing that now that my Suzie is fixed, I could have spun this on that. And, no regrets that I didn't, because I started other spins on it instead. And this has just been a really lovely project to work on. Let me see if I can find the 4th spindle, because it's part of this sort of fleet of my favorites. So this is the other one that's my favorite, and this also is an Ed Pretty, and it is not quite as light as this one. You would think that this one would be heavier, but it's a little teeny tiny bit light, or maybe this one is the lighter one. I have it written down somewhere. Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. This is my Bosworth. I'm so sorry. This is a Bosworth. So same as this one. These 3 are Bosworths, and my Ed Pretty spindles, my other one is upstairs. So I have 2 of these Ed Pretty suspended spindles, and then another Hound design one that I use. There's 6 in total that I use as my favorites. And to be honest with you, I very rarely use any of my other ones. And I don't generally ply with my drop spindles. I generally ply on the wheel. I couldn't take a spinning wheel with us this time for our trip. We're only gone for a week, and we're not on electrical, we're not plugged in. So I couldn't take one of my electrical spinners, and I didn't want to take up the space to take a treadle wheel. I really wanted this week to be quiet and to rest and recuperate, and just to get better, to be honest. This is the braid. I haven't stripped the other half down quite yet. You can see, because the Haunuii is quite dark, it was sort of a blended top. This singles is going to be quite a bit darker because the fog, the sort of darker browny gray Haunuii that's in there, ended up sort of on the entire half when I was stripping it down, whereas the other half was lighter because the blend had more than one color of Haunuii in it. So that's going to be really interesting because the one singles is going to be quite a bit darker. And I tried, at first I was trying to split it so that I was splitting that dark brown, or sorry, gray Haunuii and trying to keep it relatively equal. And then I just thought to myself, I'm making myself crazy. And yes, one half is going to be quite a bit lighter. Look, there's no gray Haunuii in here at all. It's just the white and the silk. But I think it'll add more interest to the yarn. And my long-term plan is to weave with this probably as a supplemental warp. So a pattern yarn over top of some kind of a plain weave. And I thought, you know, how pretty will that be? So that's the other half there. So it's gonna be quite dark to spin, and I'm really looking forward to it. In the meantime, after I finish this first half, I will wind all of this off into a ball and store them, store these singles. And I did take, I'm torn right now because I'm pre-recording this, as you guys have probably figured out, obviously. I am torn between taking a bobbin winder and winding off the singles onto a storage bobbin, or taking a ball winder and winding them off onto like a toilet paper roll. I'm thinking I'll take the weaving bobbin winder. But I will let you know which one I chose, because that's generally, I do prefer to put singles on storage bobbins. So that's probably what I'll do. And I just set the spindles up in a basket with holes in it so that the shaft of the spindle can go through the holes and anchor them. Or to be honest, I asked Mike to just hold it in his hand like this. And I'll get him to hold it and I'll wind it off with him holding it in his hand. And he doesn't mind. He's such a good sport about that kind of stuff. So that is my spindling. And because we are in the midst of spindle spun season, I have been really making it a priority to hop on my spindles, and I've been really, really enjoying it. So if that is something that you're working on and you are doing spindle spun summer as well, or season, spindle spun season, to capture our friends down in the Southern Hemisphere where it's winter right now, let me know how it's going. I would love to hear. Okay, I have a lot of skeined and finished yarn, so we are going to do that next. So as many of you know, right now is Tour de Fleece, and Tour de Fleece mirrors the Tour de France and goes from the same dates. They have challenge days on the same days, rest days on the same days. We've been doing a Tour de France kind of Tour de Fleece spin-in every Wednesday morning, and hopefully we'll still be able to do that tomorrow morning. I'm not sure how I'm going to do with Wi-Fi and whatnot, but you guys join and do the thing anyhow. The Zoom meeting will still start even if I'm not there. The cool thing about Tour de Fleece is it's really a community coming together at the same time of the year to do a thing that we all love at the same time. Usually what ends up happening is Instagram just kind of ends up being bobbin shots and finished yarn and spindles and just a celebration of all things hand spinning. Not so much the finished yarn, but just hand spinning in general. The Slack channel's been really blowing up with a lot of your projects and what you guys have been doing, and it's just a really wonderful time of the year. It's one of my absolute most favorite events of the year. And what's happened for me the last couple of years is actually I haven't done a lot of spinning for Tour de Fleece. And I end up kind of sitting on the sidelines watching you guys because of just the way that life has been, the age of the kids, the stage that we were at, all that kind of stuff. So this year, and it kind of coincided with getting this stupid cold, is I really made it a priority to get my stuff pulled out and really make sure that I was gonna do Tour de Fleece at the same time, even if I didn't have like a major plan. So what's been really cool is I have three, I'm down to 3 bins of old braids, and they're all dyed by different dyers. The bases and the diversity of what I have is very wide. lots of color. There's no rhyme or reason. It's all just, you know, stuff I've been collecting since 2014. And some of it is dated 2014, 2015, 2016. Some of it is quite compacted and might not even really be spinnable, but it's these three or four bins, I think it's 3, of these braids. So what I did was randomly, I just pulled out one of the 3 bins and I started spinning from it. I didn't have any like reason for picking that bin. It wasn't that there was stuff in there that I particularly wanted to spin, but I just thought if I could get through this bin in Tour de Fleece and Tour de Fleece Femme, or at least the better part of it, that would be amazing. So I started off with a braid of, and we're gonna flip to the other screen. So I started off with this braid of Hello Yarn, and this is from Very Deep Stash, circa 2021, so it's not actually that bad, but it's called Botany, and it was from Fiber Club August 2021, and it is a Rambouillet. And I pulled it out and started spinning it. These are the colors. You guys can see these are totally, I love these colors. They are so wonderful. I loved the rich wine red in there and the orangey rust. I just thought it was really pretty. I had no reason for choosing this braid first. I just literally reached into the bin and grabbed one out. I did strip it down. I stripped it down lengthwise and stripped it into smaller nests of fiber to spin, mostly just because it's easy and it's fast and quick. And if you pre-draft your fibers slightly, it adds a little bit of air. So I had to pause the recording because I'm absolutely freezing and I needed to put on a sweatshirt. So sorry about that. And then I applied them. I had a recent comment left on the YouTube channel that was really helpful, and it was somebody asking for some more statistics around the yarns that I spin and how they change, and you know, pre and post yardage, so that people sort of have a general idea of how much yardage I'm using for certain things, you know, certain sweaters, whatever it is. Because over the last couple of years, I've definitely gotten a bit lackadaisical about sharing some of that statistics and information with you guys. And I think a lot of it is, some of it I just kind of know, and some of it is just not taking the time to write things down, and then I don't remember the numbers later. So it was actually really cool to have somebody reach out and say, hey, like that would be really helpful for me. So I actually did do some numbers. I took some measurements before and after this yarn was finished. So this is the yarn washed and finished, and I'm really happy with how this yarn came out. And actually I'll probably just leave it here on this photo for a bit so that we can talk through how this yarn changed. So one of the things that we know about Rambouillet is it's a fine wool. It does tend to have a lot of bounce and sproing after it's washed, and once that crimp is reactivated in the washing. The way that I finish most of my hand spun yarns, especially if they're 100% wool, is with water that's warm to the back of my hand. So definitely on the warmer side, getting to that sort of, you know, slightly uncomfortable on the back of my hand temperature. I don't take a thermometer out and I don't do all of that. I'm not that scientific about it, but you know, a little bit uncomfortable to the back of my hand, warm. And I add some eucalyptus to it, and then I leave the yarn to soak in that for a while. What's been really interesting about these braids from Stash that are getting a little bit older, like this one, for example, you know, is 5 years old. Every single one of them, it didn't matter who the dyer was, it didn't matter what the colors were, every single one of them bled a little bit in the wash. So I took a page out of Dion's book, and I'll go back, and when I am ready to use these yarns, I'll soak them in citric acid for a little bit and see if I can get them to stop bleeding. They mostly ran clear once I rinsed them a couple of times, but every single one of the braids bled, every single one. Didn't matter who the dyer was, but you know, they're all 5 years or more older. So I kind of wasn't surprised. Anyhow, statistics. This yarn was approximately 700 yards finished of 2-ply. From a 4-ounce braid. Pre-wash, I had done the post-washing yardage, but pre-washing was about 700, probably just shy of 700 yards. It was 20 wraps per inch before washing, but post wash it did poof up to between 16 and 18 wraps per inch. That would be the difference in the needle size. So if I hadn't have finished it and I'd gone and knit something based on it being 20 wraps per inch, it would have really filled in those knit stitches and really poofed in those knit stitches and probably created a little bit of an unpleasant dense fabric. So it poofed quite a bit. And then for the twist angle, this is actually really interesting. Pre-washing, it was between 20 and 25 degrees for the twist angle in the 2-ply. And that's not unusual for me post plying. And I thought that I was putting in quite a bit more twist than that. But you know, the singles had rested overnight on the bobbin and I wasn't really super aggressive about plying, but you know, making sure that it was a nice angle as it wound onto the bobbin. Post washing, it did poof up quite a bit and filled in that space. And the twist angle was 40 degrees post finishing. So big change, and that's from the fibers, you know, poofing out, that crimp being reactivated and everything just kind of filling in, if you will. You end up with that more severe twist angle. So I'm really glad that I didn't crank in even more twist in the plying because I knew the singles had been resting. I knew they were going to poof up in the washing, but that's quite a big change from 20 degrees to 45 to 40 degrees. So I'm glad that I didn't crank in the twist in that. So love this yarn, finished, and that is the first one of the sort of collection, if you will. So from there, the next one that I grabbed was, so I had the whole bin in front of me, but the next one that I reached in and grabbed was an old braid of SheepSpot. So Sasha is based out of Ontario and she runs a spinning school that's called SheepSpot. And there are some members in our own community that go back and forth between Woodland Spinning and SheepSpot, which is really cool. And this braid was also deep stash. And actually I was gonna look before recording if there was a date on this, because I don't think that there is, but I'm sure that this is from 2017, 2018, I would suspect. Anyhow, this is one of my absolute most favorite bases to spin. This is Whitefaced Woodland. It's a slightly hardier breed. I would compare it to sort of a slightly coarse Corriedale. Long stapled, it spins really nicely. Maybe similar to like a bit like a Romney. Maybe a cross between a Romney and a Corriedale, but on the slightly coarser side. I'll just press play here on the slideshow. These colors were, you know, very muted. They've got that beautiful navy blue in there. And I did the same thing as I did with the Hello Yarn spin. I stripped it down in half, separated for 2 bobbins, stripped it a little bit more from there, pre-attenuated a little bit. These are the 2 nests sort of ready for spinning for each bobbin. And then I spun to one bobbin and spun to the other bobbin. I think this spin might have been finished within about 24 hours. It was so fast. And these are the 2 bobbins ready to go for applying. And I do remember that I rested them overnight. So I had all the spinning done in one night and then I rested the singles overnight, just, you know, because they're easier to manage if you let your singles rest a little bit. And then this was the finished plied yarn. And I've got numbers for you for this one as well. So the colorway was called Winter is Coming. So it must have been right when Game of Thrones was really popular and when that was all going on. Pre-washing, denser, heavier wool, not as fine as the Rambouillet. 440 yards out of the 102 grams. Pre-washing, it was it was about 16 wraps per inch, very even and very consistent the whole way through. I find this particular base is extremely easy to spin very consistently. It's really easy to grab the same number of fibers every single time. It's just easy peasy lemon squeezy, this type of a wool. I find with the really super fine wools, sometimes you get like chunks pulling forward of the fine wool, and it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to spin really super consistently. Just takes practice. It just takes watching that drafting triangle and making sure that you're pulling the same number of fibers every time. But these types of wools, it's really easy, and it's a really good opportunity to practice. So pre-washing, it was 16 wraps per inch, which is one of my most favorite weights of yarn just in general. And then post-washing, it did poof up more than I thought it would. So the crimp reactivated more so than I thought that it would. Post finishing, it's between 12 and 14 wraps per inch. So a little bit thicker than the Rambouillet. And it was between 30 and 40 degrees for the twist angle prior to washing, and post washing it was a full 40 degrees. So it didn't, the twist angle didn't change that much, but it did change a little bit. It definitely, that crimp was reactivated enough that it tightened up the angle a little bit more, which makes sense because it also expanded in diameter slightly from 16 wraps per inch down to roughly 13 wraps per inch. So a little bit of a change there, but not a ton and not as much as the Rambouillet. Loved this spin, really, really, really enjoyed it. And I'm happy also to have this sprayed out of my stash. This is one more photo of it in the skein. I love to see the difference of what the skeins look like when the hank is sort of just, you know, laid on a surface versus when it's actually skeined. I find it's really helpful to see how the colors are different. With this braid of the Whitefaced Woodland, the colors basically matched up in plying. So all of the tawny browns, they all plied together. All of the navy blue basically plied together. You can really see it there. All of that beautiful silver gray blue plied together. Same with the teal. Because I didn't really do much with each of the halves, I think I only stripped it down once for each bobbin, and the colorway repeated twice. The colors basically all matched up in the final skein, which is really cool. That's my most favorite effect, is when the colors mostly match up, and it'll create some very gentle striping with big thick stripes in the final fabric. So after I finished those first two spins, and I finished them within about 2 or 3 days, maybe 4, and this was when I was feeling probably the absolute worst of this cold. I can't believe it was 10 days ago, almost 14 days ago now, by the time I'm going back and recording this, and I'm still not feeling 100%, but I finished them relatively quickly. And because of the bin that I pulled out to theoretically spin through and get finished, I don't think I'm going to finish all of the yarn in there, but you know, I'll probably be able to finish about half of it. I realized pretty quickly that 2 of the braids that had been thrown in there were in there because I was storing them together. And the reason for storing them together was that I was sort of long-term plan was to put these 2 braids together and to spin them together. So I had always made sure that they went into the same bin together, that when I was stash busting or, you know, pulling things out and kind of airing out the stash, if you will, I always made sure that these 2 braids were stored together. And when I say braid, it's because these are often braided by the hand dyers, but when you're part of a fiber club, it's not unusual to get these fibers sort of in a bag, just loosely packed. And I think a lot of it is just ease for them. They can't braid every single one and keep up with demand and supply and all that kind of stuff. So when I say braid, I'm talking about like hand dyed, you know, hand painted comb top. But these braids I had very intentionally put together. So the first one was from July of 2016. It was Falkland, and it was from Nest Fiber Studio, and then she called it Fairy Tale. And the second one I received almost a full year later in February of 2017, also part of her fiber club. And it was on superwash merino, and it was called Poppy. So these 2 braids right off the bat, as soon as I sort of, you know, they probably at the time got thrown into my stash and I didn't do anything with them. And then going back and looking at stuff later down the road, I just kept putting them together and putting them off to the side. My plan had always been to put these together. So there was more singles of the Falkland left over, and I ended up with a mini skein of just the Falkland spun up. So this is just the Falkland from a center pull ball of all of the singles that was left over. And it's really pretty. It's really pretty colors. It's roughly 16 wraps per inch. Has a nice twist angle. It's just really pretty. Lots of pink, that bright blue in there. So that was the leftover little mini skein. But basically what I did was I took the 2 braids, I stripped each of them down multiple times. I pre-drafted the superwash merino a little bit because it had been sitting in the bag for a really super long time. Falkland is one of my absolute most favorite fibers to spin. I don't really know why, I just love it. I like it more than Targhee and Rambouillet. It's fine, but it's not so fine. And I find it drafts really easily and drafts really well. And it creates a slightly harder wearing yarn compared to some of the other fine yarns that are out there. So because I had spun each of these to their own bobbin, I was starting to see and to notice how the colors were spinning up a little bit differently. So that even though the dye and generally the colors were basically the same, the superwash merino was a little bit, it wasn't quite as vibrant. It wasn't quite as dark. Whereas the Falkland was a little bit richer and a little bit darker in comparison. So this is the Falkland. Same colors, just different, slightly different degrees of saturation. And these are the 2 bobbins side by side. I don't know if you guys can make a guess about which is which, but I'll tell you because it's just easier, to be honest with you. The one here closest to me is the Falkland, and the one furthest from me is the superwash merino. So once I had them spun to 2 separate bobbins, I started to second guess myself about whether I wanted to ply them together and actually do a combo spin. But I just didn't see how I would ever use these yarns separately on their own. I would still have a yardage issue. These aren't really my colors. So I sort of figured, you know what, no harm, no foul. I'm just gonna apply them and I'll do quite a tight ply twist, make, you know, just a really bouncy, springy yarn. It's fine, it'll be really soft. I can use it for whatever down the road, maybe something for Nora. I'm not really too concerned when I'm doing these types of spins about the end use and what I'm going to actually use it for. It'll get used up at some point in something. So these were the 2 bobbins, and then when the yarn actually came out and when it actually was finished and actually, you know, plied and spun, I have to admit I was really, really surprised. I was surprised how much I liked it, for one. I was surprised how many places in the yarn that the 2 colors that were twisting together that should have created a really significant marl weren't as high contrast as I'd initially thought, just looking at the bobbins as I spun through them. So there's lots of areas in the yarn where the colors matched up closely enough that it's a very, very low contrast marl. The overall yarn just ended up being really, really pleasing and really pleasant. So I got 2 larger skeins from the combo ply, and then on top there was the little Falkland leftover baby skein. And I'm just really happy with how this yarn ended up turning out. From these colors and from this fiber, and how closely matched they were in the end, to end up with this. I just was really, really, really pleased. And it increased my confidence about, you know, holding my own in terms of going ahead with, if I think it's going to work, and then you get halfway through and you think, oh, I don't know, and not really wanting to trust your intuition, and just holding the line and continuing on. It really reinforced that for me. In terms of changes with washing and finishing and whatnot, there's about 800 yards of total yarn from the 2 skeins. I didn't include the little Falkland skein, but the 2 skeins of the combo ply. I have about 800 yards. It started off prior to washing. It started off at 14 to 18 wraps per inch, and then it finished at 12 to 16 wraps per inch. So it definitely pooped up quite a bit. And then for the twist angle, it went from between 35 and 40 degrees to 40 degrees. And I plied this quite tightly, so I wasn't surprised that in the finished yarn that the twist angle didn't change so much. I feel like it gained diameter without actually changing very much in the angle, because the fibers just kind of poofed up but didn't actually tighten in any way. I maybe am wrong about that. Maybe it wasn't as tight as I thought it was pre-washing, but I feel like it was already pretty tight. It was sort of, you know, definitely 30 to 35 degrees for sure. So yeah, that was the spin. I was very, very happy with it and really, really pleased with how the final yarn came out, and looking forward to hopefully using this in the future. So the final spin that I wanted to talk about today that is finished, there's sort of these 5 skeins so far, and hopefully I have more to chat with you about when we come back in August. But this braid from Stash, I have been saving. So this is one of those braids that I received from the Hello Yarn Fiber Club years ago, and I really did hang on to it and didn't spin it right away because I loved it so much. So this is Eider wool. This is from Fiber Club February of 2021, and it's called Little Houses. And this is a woolly wool for sure. It is a medium wool. The micron count is generally between 37 and 41 micron. These are thick fleeces from German white-headed mutton sheep. And this was one of the club months from Hello Yarn that was sort of like a different base. Like it was meant to be sort of something that most people hadn't spun before. It felt a lot like spinning Massam or Whitefaced Woodland or a really coarse Corriedale. It's got that definitely that kind of fine wool or medium wool feel to it. What really drew me into this spin was the colors. These are definitely my colors. I love them. I'm wearing them right now. I really, really love these colors. So what I did was I split the braid in half horizontally so that I had a shorter length to work from for each bobbin. And then I just started stripping it down and pre-attenuating a little bit and started spinning. This was the 2 bobbins finished before I started plying. Very, very similar in terms of how it spun, like compared to the Whitefaced Woodland. The bobbins looked very similar in terms of like their weight and the thickness of the singles. I let them rest overnight and then I plied the next day. And I have to admit, when I was plying, I was a little bit bummed with how much barber poling there was, how much marling there was. I was a little bit bummed because I sort of hoped that the colors would match up a little bit more in the plying, and what I should have done is not stripped it. I should have just split it horizontally and then just spun each to a bobbin. But I wanted to mix up the colors and I wanted it to be a little bit more jumbled up, and I wanted to just sort of enjoy spinning from slightly smaller pieces of comb top rather than having to cope with one big piece of roving or comb top, because that's not my favorite when you have to start spinning across the top and whatnot. I do prefer to spin from the slightly smaller nests, but once it was plied and once it was off the wheel, I wasn't upset anymore. It's just when you're in the moment and you're watching how much of the skein is barber poled, you're sort of like, oh, not my favorite, as many of you know. So in the end, the skein came out to be, I didn't write down the yardage, shoot. I think it's about the same as the Whitefaced Woodland. I think it was kind of in the 350, 400 yards range. It started out pre-washing between 11 and 12 wraps per inch. So the thickest of all of the yarns that I've spun thus far, definitely a heavy sport, with a 25-degree twist angle. Again, I rested the singles overnight. I knew that I didn't need to crank a ton of twist into this slightly coarser, slightly toothier wool. And post-washing, sure enough, it came out to be about 10 to 14 wraps per inch. There were some areas that were a little bit inconsistent, a little bit thinner, with a 40-degree twist angle. So it really filled in those spaces. It didn't poof like we would expect, say, a Rambouillet, but it's got a nice roundness to it, a nice kind of heavy sport, light DK, which I think is really nice actually for usability, because I find if the yarns are too fine, I don't use them. And if they're too thick, I don't use them. But if I can knit it up really comfortably between 3.5 millimeter and 4.5 millimeter needles, I probably at some point will pull it out of my stash and use it. I'd really like to see this in a toque. This would be one of those yarns for me that would probably translate into a color work toque at some point, maybe with a cream or a white background color. That is probably what this is going to end up being. I just have this sneaking suspicion. Or if I have enough yardage, a pressed flowers cowl. Not the big long one, a smaller one, but definitely something like that where there's a little bit of color work and you can see the variegation and a little bit of marling and stuff in the stitches to give it a little bit of texture. So really, really happy with this one. I think this actually might be my favorite skein of the batch. Botany, the first one that I showed you guys, was probably my second favorite. I loved the Whitefaced Woodland, and then the combo was such a lovely surprise. So all in all, I'm very, very happy with the first 5 skeins that I finished for Tour de Fleece. It's given me a lot of momentum. It's made me feel like I can actually get through some of this ladder stash that I've got in some of these bins that have been kind of hanging over me, and feeling like I've actually made a really good like I've delved into the bin and actually gotten some things out of my stash intentionally, stuff that I was looking forward to, stuff that I've been putting off for a long time that I hadn't spun up for a while. So and it had sort of kept putting onto the back burner because of other projects and wanting to work on other things. So the last project that I'll talk about today was one that I started before we left for Jasper. So let's talk about that now. This spin here, I'll just shift over a little bit so you guys can see, is from November of 2015 Fiber Club as well. I used to be part of quite a few fiber clubs and I was part of them for quite a long time. But this one here was Spunky Eclectic, and she no longer has a fiber club and doesn't do Spunky Eclectic anymore, which is really too bad because she had a really great color sense. But this one was called Heather's, and it was the luxury club of the month, club of the year. So every year, if you were part of Spunky Eclectic, one of the months was a luxury, and this one was a merino bamboo. So my long-term plan way back when had been to spin this for socks, and there is no way that I'm going to spin this for socks now. I just don't knit enough socks, and it's not something that I want to pursue and want to do a lot of after all of that sock spinning that we did a number of years ago. But I am still going to do a 3-ply. So I did a little bit of sampling, and that's it there. And you can see the bamboo in there is that heathered white. Really, really, really pretty. Very, very gray. All of that white undyed fiber in the braid because of the bamboo, because it doesn't take any dye. And then there's also merino that was left undyed. All of that is going to make the overall finished skein very pastel, very light. And with that white bamboo through, it's going to act as a tint. So it's just going to lighten the colors even more. So that dark kind of gray brown color that's in the braid originally is going to come through in the finished yarn as sort of a heathered gray and like a pastel gray. So I'm going to 3-ply this. It is spinning extremely fine, and that's the plan, is to spin this and finish this as a really super fine yarn, and then to eventually, I've been really slowly over time collecting a whole bunch of yarns that I've spun over time that are like 100% silk or merino bamboo or merino silk nylon. Just these really silky yarns that don't have a lot of crimp or a lot of memory to them. They're very drapey. You know, they maybe don't have any wool in them at all. And I've been kind of collecting them and keeping them together in one area of my stash. And my long-term plan is actually to do some pieces of fabric from them, whether it's knit or woven, I'm not sure. But I've been sort of thinking about a long-term project and putting these all together. So this is going to go with those yarns. One of the things that I talk about a lot on the show is keeping yarns with the same dyer so that you've got like the same base colors and so that they coordinate with one another. That won't be the case, and I won't be able to do that with this project and this yarn. But I think if it was woven and you've got that over under of a twill or a plain weave or a basket weave or something, I don't think it'll matter because everything will kind of look a bit confetti like and a bit sprinkle like, and you'll have sort of this color play throughout it. But I've been thinking about something like a really luxurious stole, or enough yardage and enough a large enough piece that I could actually do like a drapey shirt, or like kind of a blouse like shirt or an open cardigan. It depends on how thick the fabric is, because silk can be quite warm. And I just figured I would continue to collect these yarns over time and keep putting them together in my stashing to keep track of them. So this yarn will definitely be put with all of those yarns. So that is it for spinning for today. I have one more thing that I wanted to share with you that is something I've been working on for over a year. It's embarrassing to say that, but it's true. And I need to do a costume change on Diana, bring her forward so that I can share it with you, turn on another light because the light outside has all of a sudden changed and it's gotten quite a bit darker. And then I can share with you a very, very exciting finish that I am so pleased with. Yeah, let's do that next. So one of the things that I've been working on the last few years is working toward the goal of spinning to weave. And this has been something that's been an undercurrent of my work and a conversation that we've been having more and more in the show over time. So this fabric has quite a long story behind it, and I'm going to refer you back to previous episodes back in May, June, and July of 2026 when I was working on this fabric. I wove it up on my Leclerc Jack loom, which I don't have anymore. And the warp was 2-ply hand spun 50/50 Beaumont alpaca, and it was spun woolen. And then the weft was a mohair silk that was a lace that I very, very gently placed in as weft. And I was just very, very gentle about the whole thing, the whole weaving experience. I dyed all of the yarn, the warp and the weft, before warping and weaving. And all of this kind of ended up just being left a little bit because once I had cut out the pattern pieces, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, like I washed and finished the fabric. I talked about it on the show. I showed the fabric. I got sewing on it almost right away. And I, did all the piecing. This is the LB pullover by Paper Theory Patterns. And I had seen quite a few of them online. This is a really popular pattern. It's been made many, many, many times. And everything went really, really well. I've talked about this on the show before. I've sewn a lot over the years. I grew up sewing. My mom is a beautiful sewist. I feel very comfortable at my sewing machine and doing things. But right as I was starting this and right as I was serging the first seams to finish them off on the inside, right as I was doing that, my serger seized. And it was quite an old serger. It was over 30 years old. And that was sort of the first road bump, if you will. So as I was finishing these side seams, I had sewn them and then was going back to finish them and serge them. And they're quite heavy seams because of the hand woven fabric. Daryl Lancaster talks about on her YouTube channel about her experiences with hand woven fabrics, being they're heavier, they're harder on your machines, you have to change your needles more often. And that's certainly, my serger was already at the end of its rope in terms of the motor just seizing and getting dried out and not being able to fix that. And then the heavy nature of the fabric, there's a lot of, lint from the mohair and a lot of, stuff that gets stuck into the mechanism. It was just enough to kind of tip the serger over the edge and it wasn't able to cope. And I took it in for servicing and they called me right away and said, we're really sorry, but this serger is no longer fixable. There was a silver lining. My serger, it was my mom's serger originally, and then she had kind of given it to me. We sort of shared it, but it was sort of mine. That serger was a Pfaff Hobby Lock and sort of known for being more of a slightly heavier duty, able to cope with slightly heavier, thicker fabrics. So when I was chatting in our, we have a really, really good sewing shop here locally. For those who are in the greater Vancouver area, it's called Castles. It's excellent. They are super knowledgeable. They're great when you go in there. They're really friendly. when I went in, they were the one called to tell me that the serger had ceased and there was, you know, no future. I went in to pick it up because you have to pick it up to take it to electronic recycling. And I was looking at the sergers and I really didn't want to spend a lot, and I did want to replace it, but I was a little bit nervous about what that was going to look like. And Pfaff has since discontinued the hobby lock, but they still had 2 left from the most recent fleet that Pfaff did of the last hobby lock before they were discontinued. So even though it's a discontinued machine, I basically got 50% off and ended up with the same serger that I had before, but the new one. So that meant that I could finish the sweater, and I serged all of the rest of the seams and everything looked really good and the tension was wonderful and it was just all coming together. I did the shoulders. It's a beautiful drop shoulder. So for those of you who don't know this pattern at all, basically you have your front and your back. I had woven the piece of fabric wide enough that I could cut on the full fold, the front piece and the back piece. And so these were cut out, and then your drop shoulder is here, and then your sleeve is here. And you know, that all went together really beautifully. And then I got to the neck. And this is where everything completely went off the rails. And I think part of what was going on at the time was recovering from treatment. We were in the process of figuring out what we were going to do about the house and possibly moving. And then I put on the neckline, because those are the mock turtleneck, because I was working on it one afternoon, hoping to get it finished in the afternoon. Because it's not a difficult sew project. This is something you can sew in a day, probably a few hours if you're really good. I put it on, and no matter what I did, and I didn't have a ton of fabric, so we have to remember that. Like, I don't have yardage on yardage. I can't go back to the store to buy more. No matter what I did, and a lot of it has to do with the lack of elasticity in this yarn. This yarn has 0 give. It has a nice bias, but it doesn't have any give. The mock turtleneck was not going to go onto the sweater no matter what I did. Like, it was going to be too small, too tight. I would have to gather all of this. Like, I would have had to gather and match it and have sort of gathering around the front and back. It would have been quite tight. I tried it again with a bigger neck, but only the half mock neck, because by then I didn't have enough fabric left. And I would have had to piecemeal together a big enough piece to make another big mock neck, like a mock turtleneck that was a few inches high versus like just the 1 inch high. And it basically just sat up from the sweater like this. Like, it kind of just sat from the sweater, just sort of sitting up on its own, looking very odd. And it wasn't going to lay flat, because that wasn't what it was meant to do. And I top stitched it, not really even thinking about sort of what I was trying to accomplish. And that kind of all just went all kinds of wrong. I didn't realize until I was halfway around that I had the wrong color of thread in my machine from something I had been doing previously, and I'd forgotten to change the thread back. And now I had all these little teeny tiny stitches all along in the neckline in the actual hand woven fabric. And then I'm staring down the barrel of trying to rip it out without ripping the actual fabric itself. And I think at that point, I just sort of waved the white flag and, you know, said, I'm not going to win here. And I put it in a bag and I put it away. So fast forward another 12 months. So that was May of 2025. So fast forward another 12 months. Every so often, not enough to be a nag and not enough to be annoying on by any stretch or any means. But every so often, Dion would say to me, how's the LB going? Have you finished it? Like, are you thinking about it? And I'd be like, yeah, it's there. I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, just checking. And then another little bit of time would go by and she'd be like, hey, like, what are you going to do with the LB? Like, I'd really like to see that finish. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to take it to my mom's. I'm going to see what she thinks, and I'll get it done while we're at mom's. Okay, great. I'm getting all excited. I almost knocked over my water. And, you know, and it was just enough to keep it in the forefront of my mind, where I kept thinking about it. And I kept wondering, like, what I'm going to do, because there was 2 things that I was worried about. One, I was really worried that as I started to unpick the existing neckline, the sort of little mock turtleneck, And I'll throw in a photo here to show you guys what the LB pullover with the little neck and the big neck looks like on the pattern. And that way you can kind of see like what it looks like. So I was quite concerned about ripping it out, and I used my smallest stitch ripper that I have, and it's meant for really super fine cross stitch and really super fine work. So I could be really, really, really careful about not ripping the actual stitches of the actual fabric itself. And this fabric came out quite drapey and quite fine for a hand woven. It's not thick, but because of the silk mohair, it's such a fine strand. It's that lace weight, almost thread weight, that if you catch it with the stitch ripper, you're gonna rip through it. And sometimes a strand of that would be sitting behind the thread, and it's hard to tell which is which. So I just very meticulously and very slowly went around and ripped back all of that and was able to pull the mock neck off. So the first thing I was worried about was ripping with the stitch ripper my actual fabric. The second thing I was worried about was I knew that once I started to rip it out, that the integrity of the front and back pieces, I didn't care about the turtleneck itself. I cared about the actual pieces of the body. I was worried that their integrity was going to be wasn't going to be good, that there was going to be pieces that were going to be ruined, and then I wouldn't be able to fix it. So I worried for nothing. Once I got it out, there were areas, particularly around one of the shoulders where one of the serge seams was. There was one area where the fabric was quite unraveled, and it was unraveling, and there was quite a big area where there was no more warp or no more weft anymore, and it had all kind of just come apart. So, but it wasn't so bad, and it wasn't so thick deep into the actual piece of the fabric that it mattered. So as soon as I was able to get the turtleneck off, I took the iron to it and just very gently pressed it all flat again and laid it out on my ironing board so that it was all flat, and just very gently worked my way around to just get out any wrinkles, any area that was folded under still. I just very gently eased it out and eased it back into shape. And then I took it straight to my sewing machine, not my serger. I took it straight to my sewing machine, and I very gently, with a very small zigzag, I zigzagged around the outside, and it just secured everything. It kept it all intact. The one area where the weft had all come out, I was able to salvage it enough by just holding it together and zigzagging past it that it was all fine. And like I said, it wasn't deep enough into the fabric that it was going to matter, or that it would be visible, or that I wouldn't have been able to fix it. So then I had it fixed. So I thought, okay, that's a win. So instead of trying to continue working with the neckline, I actually went to the hem and both of the cuffs, and I hemmed and cuffed. I got that finished. I should have done that years ago, and I should have just gotten it finished, but I didn't. I left it, and I turned them. They're 1-inch seams. You turn them 1 inch and then you fold it under. Very straightforward. I had them done within about half an hour. And instead of doing a straight stitch along all of them, I have a close-up shot that I'll try and pop in here, but instead of doing a straight stitch across, I wanted the sewing machine stitch to sink into the fabric. I do this a lot on tea towels as well. And I used a very small zigzag where I caught on the wrong side. I was sewing so that the wrong side up with my feed dogs, with my walking foot. I used the walking foot for all of this to ensure that the fabric was being pulled into the machine at the same rate, top and bottom. I zigzagged along with the wrong side up so that the hem was being caught along with the body of the sweater, so that you get this really lovely zigzag all the way around, and it's basically invisible on both the cuffs and the hem. And because the thread that I used was such a good match for the color, you basically can't see it. So that worked really well. So that boosted my confidence. And then from there, it was a matter of figuring out what to do with the neckline. So I knew that I didn't have enough fabric left to do a mock turtleneck that was the full depth. I also don't love mock turtlenecks. They don't in woven fabric. This is quite a stiff fabric, like I mentioned. It's not my favorite. I've seen people online, there are a couple of YouTubers that had actually added very, very lightweight interfacing to the wrong side to stiffen it and make it stand up properly. Some of the ones that I liked the best were actually done in ribbing, so that they were more like a sweatshirt or a crew neck, and they actually laid flat against the body. And so I sort of took that and took it one step further, and I had bought ribbing fabric for this. I bought it a year ago, thinking if I can't get the mock turtleneck to work, at least I have ribbing fabric that I can add instead. And what stalled me with that was I was going to do contrasting hems with it as well, so that it would look like it was intentional, so that, you know, the neck, the cuffs, and the hem were all ribbed. And you can see how all of these little choices and all of these little things that I was kind of lining up, you eventually just get mired down in them, and it paralyzes you. And if I had sort of gone back to the drawing board and just kept it a little bit simpler, I think I would have been able to finish this a lot faster. But what ended up happening was I sort of had a bit of a moment of genius, if you will, because of being sick and sort of thinking about this for quite a long time. I wasn't ruminating about it, but I was definitely thinking about it. And I was thinking about wovens and sewing with wovens over the years, and what's worked and what's not worked. And I kind of got stuck on this idea of making my own bias tape. And I was going to make my own bias tape, and I was going to fold it in on itself, and I was going to top stitch it around. And I thought, you know, that'll solve a lot of different problems. It'll finish it off. It'll look really nice, and it'll blend into everything. I can zigzag it if I want to catch the edge like I did with the hems, and that would work really well. I've got enough fabric left that I can piece together the bias and make sure that the seams don't end up right at the front of the sweater, you know, looking really unpleasant. But what I ended up remembering was years ago when I very first started the wool circle, I talked about in one episode a sewing project that I had had huge success with, completely not intentionally. And it was the Scout Tee. And I think that's a pattern by Grain Line, if I'm correct. I'll double check. But the Scout Tee is a really prolifically made, if you Google Scout Tee sewing pattern, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects will come up. So the Scout Tee is made with a bias, it's called a bias neckline. And basically what happens is you cut a piece of fabric that matches the length of your existing neckline. And I did take off a tiny, tiny bit of length. So this measured 26 inches, 26 and 5/8, and took off just a tiny, tiny bit. So I think I made it like 26.5 inches. With a 1/4 inch for the seam allowance. And you start at the back neck in the very center back here, and you sew the two right sides together, and then you fold it in on itself, and you then take that bias and you fold it again, and you top stitch all the way around to finish. And what it creates, if it's done really well, there's a couple of like little finicky finishing things that are like little seamstress tricks, if you will, that help to have this lay even nicer, like trimming your selvage afterwards and doing a little bit of clipping. And there's like all these little tricks that you can do that help it to lay even flatter and even nicer. That's what I ended up doing. And it took a little bit of calculation, and it took a little bit of, a leap of faith a little bit. And what I did was, when I went to cut the bias tape, and I'll see if I can put in a photo here to give you an idea. When I went to cut the bias tape, I cut it so that the one side was along the selvage of the woven fabric. So that, because what I was worried about was the bulk of the actual hand woven fabric, that I wouldn't be able to fold it under like you would a lightweight woven cotton to finish the bias tape on the inside, and then you top stitch and have that nice finished edge. I was pretty sure that without making a really bulky piece of bias, something that was more like 2 inches so that I could fold it under and have enough, that I would probably have to leave it unfolded and then top stitch around, catching the woven selvage edge and the sweater itself. And that's exactly what happened. So it ended up this piece here, that where the stitching is around the neckline, is a little bit deeper than it would have been if I had only done a 1/2 inch and had been able to fold that bias tape under. But instead, leaving it flat, having that nice finished edge of the selvage, I was able to give myself a little bit of room and then zigzag around. So the zigzag actually completely blends in with the fabric. You can't even see it. My mom was like, what did you do? And she was looking at it. She's like, oh my gosh. She's like, that's genius. Like, it looks like that's how it was designed, which was a huge compliment coming from my mom. So that's what I ended up doing. It took a couple of hours to hem and to finish the neckline. It took a little bit, but as I was starting to feel better, I felt like I had the bandwidth, because part of it at the beginning of this cold was I didn't have the energy. But as I was starting to rally, I had the energy to sort of sit there and like think it through and do the measuring. And I sort of figured if this didn't work, then I would have to figure out the ribbing. And I know how I would have done it, and it would have been totally fine. But I was really hoping to figure out a way that I could use the hand woven fabric to finish it itself. The other thing that I could have done, and I'll pop a photo in here again of the bias tape on the inside, is I could have used a piece of woven cotton for the bias, so that I had like an accent piece on the inside, so you could have looked inside and seen a contrasting piece of fabric. I totally could have done that. I thought about it, but in the end I stuck with the fabric itself, partially because I wanted to use up as much as I possibly could, but also I wanted it to sort of be matching. It lays beautifully. You can see on Diana here, it lays really nicely along the front, and then at the back, with the slightly raised back, you can see that it sits really nicely. And then I was able to put in one of my labels, which gives it a nice finish. Like, it just feels finished when you put a label in something. Feels like, oh yeah, that's like done, you know? So really nice. I pinned it up on the side because that's how I would probably wear it, is tucked into one side of my jeans. I wear my stuff like that a lot. It's very common for me. And Lisa asked me if I would be wearing this today in today's show, and I said it'd probably be too warm. I ended up getting really super cold and I threw on a sweatshirt, but I will wear this at some point because I did try it on. It fits beautifully. I will wear it on a future episode, and I'll try to get some photos outside of it finished and of me wearing it. It does kind of match my hair. I've talked about that before on the show. It's not my favorite, but I also really love the greens in this. There's a lot of texture. There's some variegation in it from the darker colors where the dye struck and broke. That was all in the mohair silk. So it ended up just coming out like slightly textured and just like, I am so happy with this. It's given me a lot of confidence to go forward and to try something like this again, and to try something where I've got warp and weft hand spun. I was talking last episode in 340, I think, maybe 339, about a cardigan, like a drop sleeve kind of bulky cardigan. I'm still thinking about that as my next project, just because it'd be really super straightforward. So I will keep you posted. All right, we have been chatting for a very long time, and I want to thank you so much for joining me in this space. If you have any questions about anything that I've talked about today, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below so that I can address it and answer it for you. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your July. I know we're getting to the end of the month, and I will see you guys same time, same place back here. Is it next week? I think it's coming up really quick. I think we're like back to back again, kind of like we were in June and the beginning of July. But that always, I actually kind of enjoy that, because then I can share with you some of the stuff that I've been working on since finishing some of this stuff. Have a wonderful Tour de Fleece and a wonderful Tour de Fleece femme. For those who are new and are just checking out the podcast for the first time, welcome. Please take a moment to hit that like button and the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're really pleased to have you here. We couldn't do this without your guys' support and without those of you who support the Patreon. There is a start here guide down below that will answer a lot of your questions in terms of like where people generally begin, where they start, how they become a part of the community. And if you're looking for the show notes to this episode, it is also listed down below. Until next time, happy spinning, happy making, happy all the things. We'll do a big community participation next show as sort of a wrap up to Tour de Fleece. And of course, in the next show, we'll be in the middle of Tour de Fleece Femme, which is always really fun because it's shorter, it's faster, and I look forward to sharing all of the things that I'm working on then, and also a bunch of the stuff that you guys are working on. So until then, happy spinning, stay safe. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.